Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Daf Yomi, Bava Metzia Tractate Bava Metzia Daf 104 Amud A. You should have put water in a bucket. Rav Papa said, with regard to these first two Mishnayot, you find that they are correct concerning both tenancy, where the tenant farmer gives a certain amount of produce to the owner and keeps the rest, as well as the case of a contractor who gives a set proportion, e.g., 1/4 or 1/3 of the yield to the owner and keeps the rest. From this point forward, i.e., from the third Mishnah of the chapter until its end, that which is relevant to a case of a contractor is not applicable to tenancy, and that which is relevant to tenancy is not applicable to the case of a contractor. The Mishnah teaches, if the cultivator says to the landowner explicitly, lend me this irrigated field, or he said, lease me this field with trees, and the spring dried up or the trees were cut down, he may subtract from the produce he owes as part of his tenancy. The Gemara asks, but why is this so? Let the owner say to him, I told you only the name, i.e. the type of the field, but this does not mean that it would actually be irrigated during the time you're cultivating it. Isn't it taught in a brisa? In the case of one who said to another, I'm selling you a bait core. What's a bait core? A bait core offer of dirt. The rival claims that the correct reading of the brisa is this bait core and this vineyard and this orchard, although the buyer can claim he thought he would receive more land from elsewhere or that vines would be planted for him. Since the seller mentioned this particular field and this part is called by this name, transaction is still complete. But if he does not mention specifically this field, the seller may not give the buyer less than the stated amount. Field of dirt. What's a base core? A base core is an area of land that can produce a core or 30 seah of grain. The amount of land required to produce a seah of grain is 50 cubits by 50 cubits or 2,500 square cubits. A base core therefore contains an area of 75,000 square cubits, which is approximately 18,750 square meters. Base core afar, a base core of dirt. If one says to another, I am selling you a base core of dirt, then even if the field is smaller than a base core, the transaction is complete, as he meant only that the field is called a base core. This is a halacha provided that the seller can prove that the field is in fact known by this name. Rambam Sefer Kin in Hilchah Mechila 28:14, Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 218:17. Although the field contains only half core, once a buyer purchases the dirt, it has come to him, i.e. he may not retract from the transaction, as the seller sold him the dirt only by the name, and he did not mean its size was precisely a bait core. The Brisa adds, and this is the halacha only whether that field is called by people a bait core. The Brisa continues, similarly, if he said, I'm selling you a vineyard, then although it does not have vines, once he purchases the land, it has come to him. Now the seller sold him the field only by the name, and this is the halacha only where it is called a vineyard. Likewise, if he said, I'm selling you an orchard, Kama Pardes, if one said to another, I'm selling you my vineyard in such and such a place, or I am selling you an orchard in such and such a place, then even if the land does not contain any vines or pomegranates, it is a proper sale, provided the plot is called by that name. That's the Rambam Sefer Kin, Hilchah Mechila 28:14, Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 18:18. Even though it does not have pomegranates, once he purchases the land, it has come to him, as he sold him only by the name. And again, this is the case where it is called an orchard. Apparently, the seller can say to him, I told you only the name. So to hear, let the seller say to him, I told you only the name. Shmuel said it's not difficult. This price is comparable to a case where the owner of the land said to the tenant farmer what he was leasing him. Well, in that Mishnah, the tenant farmer said to the owner of the land what he was leasing from him. The reason for the difference is the owner of the land said the terms to the tenant farmer, and he can claim that he told him only the name, and the tenant farmer cannot object. But if the tenant farmer said the terms to the owner of the land, then he was clearly particular to receive a field that would be irrigated when he cultivated. Ravina said both this brighter and that. Ravina Amar Edi ve'Edi. The commentaries consider the relationship between Ravina's opinion and Shmuel's. Some explain that Ravina agrees with the distinction made by Shmuel and is adding an additional distinction. Others say that Ravina holds that his own distinction is the only relevant one to the Rambam and the Ran. Mishnah are referring to a case where the owner of the land told the tenant farmer what he was leasing him. As he implied by the Mishnah, But since the owner said this irrigated field, by inference, we are dealing with one who is standing inside it. Why then does the owner need to state that this is an irrigated field? It's obvious simply by looking at that it is irrigated. Rather, the owner must have said to him, by way of emphasis, that he's providing an irrigated field as it currently stands. Mishnah. Hamakaba started Machavero Rahavira Shemin Oso Kama Ruya Lasso Senotin Lo Shekach Kose Lo Im Ovir Vela Avid Ashonim B'mei Tava. With regard to one who receives a field from another as a contractor and then lets it lie fallow. Hamakaba started Rahavira. If one receives part of the field and also cultivated, and he lets all or part of it remain fallow, the court appraises how much he should have produced, and the cultivator must pay the owner his share of this amount. Even if this condition did not appear in their contract, it is considered as though it were written as maintained by the Rambam and Tosfot. Rambam says, Mishpatim Hilchos Hirak 8:13 Shochnoch Mishpat 28:2. And does not work the land at all. The court appraises it by evaluating how much it was able to produce if it cultivated, and he gives his share of this amount to the owner. The reason is that this is what the cultivator writes to the owner in a standard contract. So what's the footnote? The owner comes to ask if he were an explicit condition, he must certainly fulfill his word. What then is the novelty of the statement? The Rabbeinu Hananel explained that this is a case where the condition was not properly drafted, as it is not formulated as a compound condition, stipulating both positive and negative outcomes. Furthermore, that a stipulation of this kind can be viewed as a transaction with inconclusive consent, asmachta, as he does not expect to have to fulfill it, and such a stipulation is not binding. Therefore, if it were not for the principle discussed in the Gemara that common language is expounded, the document would be rejected. Other early commentaries contend that these claims concern the formulation of the stipulation of an asmachta are not definitive. See the Rambam and the Rash, but the majority of early commentaries and authorities agree that even if this condition does not appear in the document, it is viewed as if it were written, as this was generally the local custom. Its admission is merely assumed to be the result of a scribal error, and that the terms of the document must be fulfilled regardless. In the Yerushalmi Talmud is explained in this way as well, and that's from the Gaonim, Tosfot, and the Rambam. If I let the land lie fallow and do not cultivate it, I will pay with best quality produce. Rabbi Meir would expound common language. So what's for Dorish Lashon Hidriyot. With regard to legal documents, local custom is followed. Therefore, even if a certain practice was not a rabbinical ordinance but merely a common practice, to treat it as though it was written in a document despite its omission. The same applies to communal ordinances or other city customs. That's from the Shulchan Aruch Chosh Mishpat 42:15 and the comment of the Ramah. Dorish Lashon Hidyot. Various interpretations of the expression have been suggested. According to some commentaries, it means that the conditions discussed in the Gemara are treated as requirements established by rabbinic ordinances and must consequently be followed even if they are not written in the document. They add that the word expound in the case of Rabbi Meir regards the contract as if this clause were written even if when it was omitted. Alternatively, the expression can be explained as Rabbi Hananel, Rabbeinu Hananel, that even though one used common language without carefully formulating the details, the language in the document is accepted as binding. Other early commentaries such as the Ramban and the commentary attributed to the Ritva pointed out that these explanations not fit well with the word expound. Most early commentaries accept the interpretation of Hagon and Rabbi Yehuda of Barcelona that the word expound has the same meaning here as elsewhere. According to this approach, although these common contractual phrases can be explained simply in a far more limited way, the sage expounded and inferred halakhic principles from them as though they were written in the Torah. Consequently, they arrived at binding legal conclusions based on omissions from and imprecise formulation of actual contracts. In this particular case, although the document can be understood simply as a hyperbole, an assurance on the part of the tenant farmer that he will work the field and pay the standard amount, the sage inferred that he must in fact pay from the best of his possessions. Similarly, with regard to a marriage contract, one might have thought that writing acts as a promise to repay you for all the obligations that you have, even those from beforehand, is merely a vivid way of saying that the groom accepts upon himself the duty to pay for the household expenses, similar to other flowery terms written in the marriage contract. Likewise, a straightforward reading of the marriage contract from Alexandria indicates that only after the wedding the woman will no longer be betrothed, but will have a full-fledged status of wife, and the statement concerning the collateral money attests that a deposit was taken. Nevertheless, in all these cases, sages read the wording as carefully as if it were written in the Torah itself, and expounded all its meanings. See the Rambam and the Rashba. Using legal documents written by ordinary Jews to deduce halachic conclusions, although these formulations were not prescribed by the sages, one can nevertheless infer halachot from them if they are used in legal documents. As it is taught in a Braita that presents a similar case to the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir says he is liable to pay. As the document states, if I let the field lie fallow and do not cultivate it, I will pay with best quality produce. Likewise, Rabbi Huda would also expound common language, as is taught in a Braita. Rabbi Huda says, in a case where a woman has given birth, is commanded to bring an offering of a childbearing woman, and her husband is sufficiently wealthy, a person brings an offering of the rich. What does that mean? Karban Asher, the offering of the rich. The reason the Gemara mentions the offering of a wealthy person, which is a reference to the sliding scale offering, is because this category offering applies to a woman following childbirth, a woman who is a zava, both of which affect the husband as well. Consequently, it might be thought that only in cases is his financial status taken into account. Rabbi Yehuda therefore teaches us that the same principle applies even to offerings that are only for her personal atonement, and that's the weird Tosfot in Nazir 24a. He Tosfot on behalf of his wife. What does that mean? Maybe Karban Asher al Ishtel, bring the offerings of the rich on behalf of his wife. A husband must pay for all offerings that his wife is obligated to bring. If he is poor, he brings the offering of a pauper. If he is wealthy, he brings the offering of a rich man. I'm going to say for Kabbalah, Hilchot Shigagot 10:6. This is even if his wife does not possess money of her own, and perhaps should have been considered poor. Similarly, he may bring every offering that is obligated to bring, such as a sin offering or guilt offering. He pays for all of these offerings because this is what he writes to her in a marriage contract. I accept upon myself to repay you for all the obligations you have, even those from beforehand. Consequently, he must fund all of her offerings. Similarly, Hillel the elder and his colleague Shammai were the last of the Zugot, the pair of Tanaim who led the Sanhedrin toward the end of the Second Temple era. Hillel served as Nasi of the Sanhedrin, and Shammai was the president of the court. These leaders lived approximately 100 years prior to the destruction of the temple, coinciding with the beginning of Herod's reign. We'll expand common language as well, as is taught in the Bible to the inhabitants of Alexandria. Alexandria, this port city, lies west of the Nile Delta and was founded by Alexander the Great in 332 BCE. In its glory days, during the Ptolemaic rule in Egypt and until the end of the Mishnaic period, Alexandria was one of the largest cities and cultural centers in the world. Many of the greatest scientists, doctors, and artisans of the time lived in Alexandria, who betrothed their wives a significant amount of time before the wedding, as was customary in those days, and at the time of their entry into the wedding canopy, others would come and snatch the women from their husbands. The sages consequently sought to establish the children of these women as mamzerim. This is because with regard to sexual intercourse with other men, a betrothed woman has the status of a married woman. Consequently, if she is taken by another man, her children fathered by that man are mamzerim. Those are children of a married woman who were fathered by a man other than her husband. The elder said to the children who came before him for a ruling on their status, bring your mother's marriage contract for examination. They brought him their mother's marriage contract, and he found the following formulation was written in it: when you will enter the wedding canopy, Rashi explains that this formulation is written in the marriage contract for their betrothal. This explanation is puzzling, as marriage contracts were not usually drafted at the stage of betrothal. The Rid therefore claimed that it is more likely that this formulation appeared in the marriage contract given to the woman at the wedding. Accordingly, Hillel the elder was not saying that the clause written in the marriage contract in and of itself renders the betrothal a conditional one, but that from the presence of this clause in the marriage contract, one can infer that the betrothal was a conditional one. to be for me a wife. This shows that the marriage will not take effect at the time of her betrothal, but only after she would enter the wedding canopy. Consequently, the marriage did not occur at all, as she never entered the wedding canopy, and therefore these women did not cause their children to be mamzerim by engaging in intercourse with the other man. The Gemara adds, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who's that? Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha was one of the elder Tanaim from the generation of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel II. Many commentators, including Tosfot, have attempted to identify him as Rabbi Yeshua, son of Rabbi Akiva, but it is difficult to prove. Little is known about him, and only a few traditions of Halach and Agada are transmitted in his name. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha enjoyed a long life, and once blessed Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. May it be his will that you will reach half my days, beginning at 28 Due to his long life, he was able to engage a halachic dispute with the sages from several generations. He was apparently honored by all toward the end of his life, as the sages of that time came to receive his blessing, and he took care to guide them along the right path. Would also expound common language, as is taught in the Bible. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says, one who lends money to another may not take more collateral for him than the value of his debt, as this is when the debtor writes to the creditor. If the creditor temporarily returns the deposit for the debtor's use, the payment to which you have a right, which it is upon me, Taslumsa de is loch alai. The main purpose of this formulation is to prove that the collateral should be considered as belonging to the creditor. So if the debtor happens to sell it, the creditor can claim it from the buyer, says the Rid. Alternatively, it means that if the deposit decreases in value, the creditor must bear the loss, and he cannot claim the amount of the deterioration to derive it to pay. Corresponding to the entire value of this item, indicating that the item cannot be greater in value than the debt itself. The Gemara first, the reason the creditor acquired the collateral is that he wrote this to him, but if the creditor does not write this to the debtor, will the creditor not acquire the collateral? But doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say, if a creditor took collateral from the debtor, and returned the collateral to him, and then the debtor died, the creditor removed the collateral from the debtor's children. If the debtor passed away after the creditor had temporarily returned his collateral, the creditor may take it from the debtor's sons and does not have to return it to them. That's in the Rambam Sefer Mishpatim, Hilchot Mal Valova 3.6, Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 97.19. The reason for this is that although movable property of orphans is not acquired by the father's creditors, the collateral is considered to belong to the creditor, and he can collect the debt from it. The Gemara answers, the writing of the statement in the document is effective for depreciation. So what does that mean? Ahane Kasiva Mageiron. Rashi explained that if the collateral depreciates in value due to the debtor using the item, the creditor may claim more property, but most of the Sephardic scholars interpret this halacha in the opposite manner, that if the value of the collateral decreases, the creditor may not collect from the rest of the debtor's property at all. See the Ran. If the collateral depreciates in value, the creditor may claim the remainder of the debt from the debtor's property. The Gemara continues, Rabbi Yossi would also expand common language, as is taught in a Braita, that Rabbi Yossi says, in a location where they were accustomed to formulate the terms of a marriage contract, as one will formulate the terms of a loan. So what does that mean? Last says Kasuba Milver. There are two fundamentally different explanations of this passage, and the meaning of the term marriage contract is different in the two explanations. Rashi explained that the term marriage contract in this context does not refer to the sum to be paid by the husband or his estate to the wife upon termination of the marriage, whether by divorce or the husband's death. Rather, it refers to the sum of the dowry provided by the father of the bride to the husband. This sum was accorded in the marriage contract and would be returned to the wife upon termination of the marriage. In some locations, they would record the actual value of the dowry in the marriage contract, while in others, they would record an inflated value to honor the bride. Accordingly, the discussion in the passage concerns what sum the wife will receive for the return of the dowry upon termination of her marriage. Does she receive the entire sum written in the marriage contract, or only the true value of the dowry paid by her father? Most of the commentators explain the Gemara in this manner. By contrast, Rav Hai Gaon explains that the term marriage contract in this passage is referring to the sum that will be paid by the husband or his estate to the wife upon termination of the marriage. He explains that while generally this sum was paid only upon termination of the marriage, there were locations in which the marriage contracts would record the sum as if it were a loan from the wife to the husband. In those locations, she would be able to collect it even during the marriage. See the Ravid and the Rashash. What was the other footnote? If a married woman and the financial details are not specified in the marriage contract, they are assumed to have been in accordance with the local custom, both with regard to the sum of the marriage contract and with regard to the dowry. Therefore, when either of the parties comes to claim the money, it is done in accordance with the local custom. If she claimed that she added more to the dowry than was local custom, means she must be proved as a Ramah. If the husband wishes to give her less than the accepted amount from the marriage contract, he may do so as long as he does not provide less than the minimum sum required by the Sage Seeker 2, but 54b. In some locations, the custom is to use a standard formulation in all marriage contracts, even if she provided no dowry at all. If the husband does not wish to become obligated to repay the amount accorded as the dowry, she writes that she has already received it from him. That's in the Rambam Sefer Nashim Hilchot Yishud 23:11, Shulchan Aruch Even Ezer 66:11, and the comment of the Ramah. Either besides value of a dowry is written in the marriage contract, then upon the termination of the marriage due to divorce or the husband's death, the wife collects the sum of a dowry as a creditor would collect payment of a loan. In other words, she receives the entire sum accorded in her dowry. Conversely, in a place where the custom is to double the written sum of the dowry in the marriage contract to honor the bride, so it should appear as though her father is providing her husband with a considerable dowry, she collects only half of the sum written in the marriage contract. The Gemara relates the sage of Nahabela was probably located on a river on Hebrew and Nahar. This river has been identified as the Baal River, or possibly the Bel or Bil River in northern Babylonia. The Gemara in Sanhedrin 17b states that the phrase the sage of Nahabela refers primarily to the local scholar Rami Bar Karibi or Rav Ami Bar Beruchi. I allowed the wife to collect 1/3 of the stated sum, as the custom in that location was to write 3 times the actual amount of the dowry in the marriage contract. Me'amah would allow the wife to collect even the added value of those sums that the father of the bride had written in the marriage contract in honor of his daughter. Ravina said to Ma'amah, but isn't it taught in the Bible that in a location where the custom is to record double the amount, she only collects half? The answer is not difficult. In this case, where Narema allowed the wife to collect the full sum, the husband performed an act of acquisition for the entire written sum with the father of the bride. Whereas in that case, where the bride ruled that she collect only a portion of the sum written for a dowry, the husband did not perform an act of acquisition for the entire amount with the father of the bride. Therefore, the wife would collect the sum of a dowry only in accordance with the regular custom. The Gemara relates, Ravina wrote an enhancement of the value of the dowry for his daughter in a marriage contract. In keeping with the accepted custom, the groom's family said to Ravina, let us perform an act of acquisition with the master, so that he would be required to give the entire sum as a dowry. Ravina said to them, if you wish to perform an act of acquisition, I will not double the sum of the dowry, but will record the actual sum I intend to provide. If you prefer that I record double the sum of the dowry in the marriage contract, I will not allow you to perform an act of acquisition. The Gemara cites a related incident. There was a certain man who said to his inheritors before death, give 400 dinars to my daughter in a marriage contract. Rav Aha, son of Rav Avia, sent the following question to be asked before Rashi. What was that man's intention? Did he mean an actual dowry of 400 dinars, which are written as 800, or 400 dinars written in the marriage contract, which are actually a dowry of 200 dinars? Rashi said, we examine the matter. If he said give her, then he meant to write her 400 dinars, which are written as 800. But if he said write for her, then he meant write 400 dinars, which are actually 200 in practice. There are those who say a different version of Rashi's ruling. Rashi said, we examine the matter. If he said for her marriage contract, the 2 bata, he meant 400 dinars, which are written as 800, because he indicated that the sum he wants to give her a dowry. But if he said in her marriage contract, the 2 bata, the 2 basa, if a man instructed that his daughter be provided with 400 dinars for the marriage contract, and no custom is to record double the value, and which the dowry says, she may take only 200. It makes no difference whether he said for her marriage contract or in her marriage contract. This ruling is according to the conclusion of the Gemara, the Rambam Sefer Kin and Hilchot Kira Matana 11:21, Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat 253:15. He was clearly referring to the written amount, and it is assumed that he meant to write 400 dinars, which are 200 in practice. The Gemara comments, and this is not so. There is no difference whether he said for her marriage contract, and there is no difference whether he said in her marriage contract. So what's the footnote? Although in Tractate Ketubot 54b, a distinction is drawn between the expressions for sustenance, limzonot, and with sustenance, bimzonot. In this case, since he specified that the summons for the purpose of the marriage contract is considered the same as the accepted formulation used in the marriage contract, and no distinction is based on nuances of language, and that's in the Russian Iran. In either case, her dowry is written as 400 dinars, which are 200 dinars in practice, unless he simply said, give her without specification, i.e. without mentioning the marriage contract. In that case, the full sum is given as a dowry. The Gemara relates another incident. There was a certain man who received land from another to cultivate it. He said, if I fell to work the land, and instead let it lie fallow, I will give you 1,000 dinars. If one wrote that if he lets a field lie fallow, he will pay the owner of the field 1,000 dinars, it is considered as an asmachta, and the owner may consequently not collect this sum. Rather, he is entitled to a share of the amount the field would have produced. Rama Seif Mishpat and Hilchot Kiwit 813 Shulchan Aruch Hoshem Mishpat 328 2. In either her case, the dowry is written as 400 dinars, which are 200 in practice, unless he simply said, give her without specification, without mention. Have I said that one? I said that. And he let 1/3 of it follow. The sage of Nahadia, what's Nahadia? Nahadia is a city on the Euphrates near the Malka River. Nahadia was one of the oldest Jewish communities in Babylonia. According to tradition, Jews lived in Nahadia as early as First Temple times in the 6th century BCE, beginning with the exile of Jehoiakim of Judea. One of the most important Jewish communities in Babylonia, Nahadia was the center of Torah study from the early period, and Yeshiva was the oldest in Babylonia. Many of the greatest Tanaim visited Nahadia, among them Rabbi Akiva, who intercalated the year there. Yevamot 123a. During the life of Rav, who lived in the first half of the 3rd century CE, the Yeshiva Nahadia was headed by Rav Shida and then by Shmuel. Since the city was located near the border between the Roman and the Persian empires, it frequently suffered from the wars between the two. Papa ben Nazir, the Nathos, king of Tadmor, destroyed it entirely in 259 CE. Later Jews resettled there, and mainly Torah scholars moved to Nahadia, even after its yeshiva moved to Mahoda and Pumbedita. The halacha is that he gives him 333 and a third dinars, 1/3 of the stipulated amount, as compensation for neglecting 1/3 of the field. Rava said this kind of agreement is a transaction with inconclusive consent and asmachta, and since an asmachta does not affect acquisition, he need not pay. So what's an asmachta? Asmachta is a transition with inconclusive consent, and an asmachta refers to an obligation undertaken under certain conditions that one does not expect to be required to fulfill. For example, if a seller agrees to pay exaggerated penalties if he fails to deliver merchandise by a certain time, he believes that he will certainly deliver the merchandise by that time, and will therefore never need to pay the penalty. The sages disagreed as to whether such commitment is binding or not. According to the opinion that such a transaction is not valid, one enforces another to fulfill such a commitment and pay the penalties is considered by rabbinic law to be a robber. The Gemara asks, and according to Rava, in what way is it different from that which we learned in the Mishnah concerning one who wrote, if I let the field lie fallow and do not cultivate it, I will pay with best quality produce? The Gemara answers, there he did not exaggerate, but simply said he will pay for the owner's losses from best quality produce, whereas here, since he said something extra, he promised to give an excessively large sum of money, he's merely exaggerating. It is therefore not viewed as an actual monetary obligation, but an asmachta. The Gemara relates, there was a certain man acting as a sharecropper who received land for planting sesame. The Shum Shemay, a farmer who wishes to grow sesame plants, must invest much time and effort in properly preparing the soil beforehand, in caring for the sesame plants, and in harvesting the seeds at the proper time. But due to the process of preparing the soil, growing the sesame, and harvesting it is difficult and time-consuming, the harvest is usually much more successful and profitable than that of wheat. The factors of time and effort necessary for planting sesame one hand and a successful harvest and higher profit on the other is a base for discussion in the Gemara here, which typically weakens the land but yields larger short-term profits. When he planted it with wheat instead, if one receives a field to cultivate and agreed to plant sesame and he planted wheat instead, he must pay the owner in accordance with the value of the sesame if it was fit to produce. If the field produced wheat equal in value to the sesame, he pays him the standard amount, and he, i.e. the landowner, or the cultivator in Banishma, has nothing but a grievance against him, but he does not have a monetary claim against him. If he produced more wheat than his potential value in sesame, the additional profit is divided between them in accordance with that contract, despite the fact that the owner of the field also benefits from the lack of weakening of his field due to the planting of the wheat. That's in the Rambam Sefer, his part of Hilchot Sekirat, 8:14 Shulchan Aruch Shemit 26:1. That year, the field produced wheat at a value similar to that of sesame. One explanation is that the wheat crop was more successful than sesame in that particular year. Talmud Rebbeinu Peretz. Alternatively, Rashi indicates that the difference was simply based on the increase of the market price of wheat. See Shitimitu Best says, Shumshamei sesame, Shesamim Duchum, a variety of Pananaceae family is an important plant for the production of oil and one of the earliest cultivated plants in history. Growing annually, it is pilose and grows white or pink flowers. The sesame plant sprouts in the summer and begins to blossom within a short time, with small capsules 2 to 8 centimeters in length, ripening on the stalks that enclose the sesame seeds. Sesame seeds contain a large percentage of oil as well as protein. Sesame seed oil is considered to be a high-grade oil. It is used in pharmaceuticals as well as in cooking, specifically for making tahini, a smooth paste of sesame seeds. Plain sesame seeds are also frequently used as a spice. Sesame oil cakes, which are the byproducts of the production of sesame oil, are high in nutritional value and are primarily used as animal food. Wild sesame appears to be native to Africa, though recent studies indicate that some species originated from India. Either way, sesame subsequently spread to other warm climates though its cultivation was limited due to the difficulty of removing the tiny seeds from their capsules. Gahana thought to say that the owner must deduct the usual amount of the deterioration of the land from planting sesame from his own share, since by planting wheat the sharecropper had spared the owner the damage to his field, while the owner had received the same profit. Rashi said to Rav Kahana, people say the following proverb: let the land be weakened, but do not weaken its owner. What does that mean? The commentary attributed to the Ritva notes that this principle applies only when it is advantageous to the owner, but if the cultivator planted sesame seeds instead of wheat, in opposition to their agreement, he is liable to compensate the owner for the weakening of his field. People preferred a quick profit and discounted damage to the land. Therefore, the sharecropper is not entitled to a larger share of the yield for having spared the owner from the weakening of his field. The Gemara relates another incident. There was a certain man who received land for planting sesame, and he planted it with wheat. Ultimately, it produced more wheat than the usual value of sesame. Ravina thought to say that the owner must give the cultivator the added value that is the difference between them, the actual value of the wheat, and not the expected value of the sesame. Rav Ahab bar Difti said to Ravina, is that to say that the cultivator alone enhances value, but the land does not help to enhance it? Rather, it should divide the excess between them. A common type of business venture was one where the capital or merchandise was supplied by one person and managed by another who would receive a share, commonly half of the profits of his efforts. This arrangement can also be viewed as one where the investor is lending half of the invested capital or merchandise to the manager, with the manager agreeing to supervise the venture in exchange for receiving the loan. In order to avoid violating the prohibition of interest, the investor agreed to accept a greater share of the possible loss, e.g. 2/3 in the profits, e.g. 1/2. The Sage in Nahadia said, with regard to the halacha status, joint ventures are considered a half loan and half deposit. So what does that mean? Palga milva, palga fikadon. According to most early commentaries, the arrangement must, in fact, be contracted specifically as a half loan and half deposit, not another ratio. This arrangement also affects the obligation of the manager with regard to the money. he bears full responsibility as a borrower for half that's considered a loan, while with regard to the other half, he is merely viewed as an unpaid or paid bailee. According to the Rambam, he is an unpaid bailee, whereas others maintain that he has the status of a paid bailee, though he may conduct himself in the manner of the one safeguarding his own property, and he is not required to provide superior safeguarding. Rav Hagon interprets this statement to mean that a joint venture is in principle part of a loan deposit, a part loan and part deposit, meaning that it is treated as a loan in some ways, and as a deposit in others, but it need not actually be divided precisely in those proportions, as a half loan and half a deposit. The Mordechai cited in the Maharim of Rothenburg states that the entire arrangement is in fact considered a loan with regard to halachot, such as the halacha that one may not use the money to betroth the woman. The early commentaries question the validity of such an arrangement, see Tosfot. Being that the manager is managing the investment on behalf of the investor while receiving the loan from him, the service provided should ostensibly be regarded as interest paid on the loan. Some explain that in order to avoid this prohibition, the investor must pay the manager for the service. The Ramban comments that absent such a payment, the prohibition of interest can be avoided by having the manager receive a larger share of the profits than the investor to serve as a compensation for his efforts. The sages institute an arrangement whereby if one provides another with money to engage in business in exchange for a share of the profit, half of the capital is considered a loan for which the manager is fully liable, while the other half is treated as a deposit, and he is therefore exempt if it is lost or stolen. The profits or losses may not be shared equally between them. Whether the investor pays the manager a daily wage, or they distribute the money between them in such a manner that the investor accepts most of the risk. Rambam Sefer Kinyan Hilchot Shluchin Veshutafin 6.2 Shulchan Aruch Yerodei 177.2. As the sages formulated an enactment that would be satisfactory for the borrower, i.e. the manager, and equally satisfactory for the lender, i.e. the investor. Now that we have said that half of the capital is viewed as a loan, it would appear that the manager may use the money in any way he chooses. If he wants to drink alcohol with it, he may do so, regardless of any objection on the part of the investor. Rather disagreed and said it is for this reason that it's called a joint venture. As the investor can say to the manager, when I gave the money to you, it was to use it for business and not to drink alcohol with it. According to Rashi, the primary reason for this halacha is that the owner expects his partner to handle the joint venture in a serious, dedicated manner. Alternatively, Tatsot explained that the owner assumes that the money he gave the joint venture is a fixed, guaranteed sum and may not be spent on personal needs. One of the two possible differences between these two interpretations concerns the case when the money manager misused a small part of the money. According to Rashi, this does not matter, but Tatsot would forbid it, as doing so would decrease the owner's capital from the Torah's Chayim. Another explanation offered for this halacha is that he had retained of the full sum he might have been capable of conducting a lucrative transaction that would have been impossible in a smaller amount, thereby causing the owner a loss. That's from the base hour. The mishtei bei sichva. Although the money one gives to another for joint venture is considered as a half loan and half deposit, the manager is not permitted to use the half that is a loan for their own personal needs and will safeguard it as security. Rather, he must use all of it for commercial transactions in accordance with the opinion of Rabbah. That's from the Rambam Sefer Kinyan Hilchot Shluchin Veshutafin 7.4 Shulchan Aruch Yerodei 177.30. Rav Idi Bar Avan said, and according to this reasoning, if the manager died, it becomes movable property in the possession of his children. Therefore, it may not be taken from them, as movable property inherited by orphans is liened for the payment of their father's debts. Rav disagreed and said, it's for this reason that it's called a joint venture, so that if he died, Makaba Iska Shemais, if one received funds for a joint venture, and there were witnesses that a certain sum of money or quantity of merchandise was included in this agreement, upon the manager's death, the investor may claim the funds or merchandise without an oath, and creditors or the wife and heirs of the deceased are not entitled to the portion of the profit that belongs to the investor. And that's from the Rambam Sefer Kinyan, Hilchot Shluchin Veshutafin 7.5 Shulchan Aruch Yerodei 177.31. And does not become movable property in the possession of his children, as it is not considered a partnership, as it is considered a partnership, not a loan. Rabbi says, if two people conducted one joint venture and drafted it as a separate ventures of equal value in two separate documents, Chada Iska Ushrei Shatare, If a single joint venture was recorded in two parts, each part of a separate document, they are regarded as two distinct transactions. Consequently, if the partners earn profit from one venture but suffer losses from the other, each document is treated as a separate transaction and the profits and losses are not calculated together. If they wrote one document for two joint ventures, then even if one produced profits and the other losses, they are viewed as a single transaction and any profits are shared as stated by Rava. Shulchan Aruch Yodeh 177.33. And if they suffered a heavy loss from the venture recorded in one of the documents and had a slight gain from the other, the halacha is as follows. The two documents are treated as two separate agreements, and one does not calculate the profits and losses from the two ventures together. Therefore, this will be to the detriment of the lender. According to the common arrangement, he will gain half of the profits from one venture and suffer 2/3 of the loss from the other. And that's the end of the daf. Thank you for listening and wish you all the best. Peace in Israel. Take care. Bye.
Where did you move?
Yeah.
You talking about